Have you ever noticed that the more accommodating you become, the less at ease you feel with yourself? Not because you're weak, not because you lack confidence, but because, little by little, you've learned to trade your inner calm for external approval. You answer messages when you're already exhausted. You say yes while quietly hoping the request will disappear. You adjust your schedule, your energy, even your values, just to keep things smooth. Most people call this kindness. Stoicism calls it something else: a loss of inner authority. Here's the part most people miss. People-pleasing doesn't start with big sacrifices. It starts with small ones. Staying quiet when something feels off. Helping when your body is already tense. Saying, "It's fine," when it clearly isn't. Over time, these small concessions teach others something dangerous: that your time is flexible, your boundaries negotiable, your peace optional. And yet, Stoicism never asks you to become harsh, confrontational, or loud. You don't need to shout, "No." You don't need long explanations. You don't need to justify your limits. Real Stoic strength is quieter than that. It's the calm confidence of someone who knows where they end and refuses to disappear to make others comfortable. In this video, you'll learn 9 Stoic ways to stop being a people-pleaser without conflict, guilt, or aggression. Not by changing who you are, but by returning to yourself. If you've been feeling drained, overlooked, or quietly resentful, stay with me. This isn't about rejecting others. It's about reclaiming your inner order and letting the rest adjust naturally. Before we talk about techniques, boundaries, or responses, we need to slow down and look at the root. Because people-pleasing is not generosity. It is fear, wearing the mask of virtue, fear of rejection, fear of tension, fear of being seen as difficult, ungrateful, or unkind. And the most dangerous part is this: the fear feels moral. It feels like being a good person. This is why people-pleasing is so hard to let go of. You're not trying to manipulate anyone. You're trying to keep peace. You're trying to be fair. You're trying to avoid hurting others. But Stoicism draws a sharp distinction here between kindness and self-abandonment. When your sense of goodness depends on how comfortable others feel, your inner order is no longer yours. The Stoics noticed this pattern centuries ago. When approval becomes the goal, freedom quietly disappears. You stop choosing based on reason, capacity, and values. You start choosing based on anticipated reactions. Will they be disappointed? Will they pull away? Will they think less of me? And in that moment, your life is no longer guided by clarity, but by prediction. Epictetus captured this with brutal simplicity. We are not disturbed by requests themselves. We are disturbed by the judgment that we must accept them. The email, the favor, the expectation, these are neutral. What creates pressure is the belief that refusing makes you selfish, cold, or wrong. That belief is what tightens your chest. That belief is what traps you. At its core, people-pleasing is a misplaced sense of responsibility. You begin to feel accountable not just for your actions, but for other people's emotions. Their disappointment feels like your failure. Their discomfort feels like your duty to fix. Stoicism interrupts this illusion. It reminds you that you are responsible for your choices, your character, and your conduct, not for managing how others feel about your limits. Once this distinction becomes clear, something shifts. You realize you don't need to fight requests. You don't need to justify yourself. You simply need to return authority back where it belongs. And from that grounded place, we can begin quietly, practically, and without conflict to change how you show up. What follows are 9 Stoic ways you can learn and apply with real effectiveness. Not rules to memorize, but practices to notice, repeat, and embody. Each one is designed to help you stop people-pleasing without hardening your heart or raising your voice. So slow down, stay present, and listen closely, because these shifts don't demand force. They work precisely because they are calm. Way number 1, establish quiet boundaries. Establishing boundaries does not begin with confrontation. It begins with clarity. Most people imagine boundaries as something you announce, firm words, serious tone, a decisive moment. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Real boundaries are not declared. They are lived consistently through calm decisions that do not ask for permission. At the heart of people-pleasing is a subtle confusion. You believe access to you is something others decide. Stoicism restores the proper order. Your time, energy, and attention are not public property. They are resources entrusted to your reason. When you treat them that way, boundaries form naturally, without drama. Epictetus framed this with striking simplicity. If you wish to improve, be content to appear foolish or dull in outward things. In modern life, this often means being willing to look unavailable, unresponsive, or unaccommodating without rushing to explain yourself. The Stoic understands that protecting inner order may cost external approval, and accepts that cost calmly. Quiet boundaries are practical. They sound like this: I'm available between these hours. Lekard. I can't take this on right now. I don't have the capacity for that. Notice what's missing. No apology, no story, no emotional justification. You are not defending your worth. You are stating a condition. The moment you stop over-explaining, something interesting happens. People either adjust or they reveal expectations that were never respectful to begin with. In both cases, clarity replaces confusion. To apply this effectively, start by defining limits privately before communicating them outwardly. Decide in advance how much time you give to work, family, messages, and favors. Stoics believe that disorder in life begins with disorder in judgment. When you haven't decided your limits, every request feels urgent. When you have, responses become simple. Next, communicate boundaries early and neutrally. Not when you're resentful. Not when you're exhausted. Boundaries stated calmly are received more easily than boundaries forced in frustration. And if someone pushes back, remember, resistance does not mean you were unclear. It means the boundary is working. The effect of quiet boundaries is profound. Your nervous system begins to settle. Decisions take less energy. Resentment fades because you are no longer agreeing to what violates you. Over time, people learn how to approach you not because you trained them, but because consistency teaches better than words. Stoicism reminds us that peace is not achieved by managing others. It is achieved by governing oneself. When you establish quiet boundaries, you don't become colder, you become steadier. And steadiness, more than explanation or force, is what earns real respect. This is not withdrawal. This is self-command, and it is the foundation upon which every other change will rest. Way number 2. Start small, restore control gradually. Imagine a simple moment. Your phone buzzes late in the evening. It's a message asking for a small favor, nothing dramatic, nothing urgent. You're tired, already mentally done with the day. You hesitate. A quiet tension rises. Part of you wants to rest. Another part whispers, "It'll only take a minute. Don't make it awkward." So you answer. Again. And afterward, the familiar feeling appears: not anger, not sadness, just a dull sense of having stepped away from yourself. This is how people-pleasing usually operates. Not through big sacrifices, but through tiny, repeated concessions. Stoicism understands this well. Loss of control rarely happens all at once. It happens gradually, through habits that feel harmless in isolation. That's why Stoic practice never demands sudden transformation. It doesn't ask you to flip a switch and become someone else overnight. It asks you to restore control the same way it was lost, step by step. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that the soul is shaped by what it repeatedly consents to. Each small agreement trains your inner posture. Each small refusal does the same. The Stoic insight here is simple but powerful. You don't need dramatic courage. You need repeated alignment. Starting small means choosing situations where the emotional stakes are low, saying no to a minor request by text instead of face-to-face, taking an extra moment before responding to a casual ask, ordering what you actually want instead of defaulting to what's easiest for others. These moments may seem insignificant, but they retrain your nervous system. You learn through experience that nothing terrible happens when you don't accommodate immediately. This matters because people-pleasing is not just a belief, it's a bodily pattern. Your body has learned that refusal equals danger, tension, conflict, disapproval. Small acts of self-assertion gently correct this association. Each time you pause, choose, and survive the outcome, your system regains trust in itself. The practical advice is this: don't start where you feel the most fear. Start where you feel slightly uncomfortable, but safe. Practice restraint in simple interactions, messages, schedules, casual favors. Let your confidence grow organically. Stoicism favors stability over spectacle. A controlled step forward is worth more than a forced leap. Over time, the effect compounds. You stop feeling rushed. Decisions become cleaner. You no longer need to brace yourself emotionally before responding. Others sense the change too, not because you announce it, but because your timing and availability become consistent. You are no longer reacting, you are choosing. This is how control returns. Quietly, gradually, without confrontation. You don't become rigid or distant, you become present and deliberate. And from that steadiness, the old reflex to please begins to loosen its grip, not through resistance, but through disuse. Small steps, taken consistently, restore something essential. The feeling that your life is once again being lived from the inside out. Way number 3, set goals before you. Set commitments. One of the most common mistakes people-pleasers make is not that they say yes too often, but that they say yes without knowing what they are protecting. When your goals are unclear, every request feels equally important. Every favor sounds reasonable. Every interruption seems justified. And slowly, your days fill up with obligations that were never chosen, only accepted. Stoicism sees this as a failure of direction, not discipline. You are not lacking willpower. You are lacking a clear hierarchy of values. Without it, other people's priorities naturally take over. Seneca warned about this exact trap when he wrote that it is not that we have little time, but that we waste much of it. Time, to the Stoics, was not just hours, it was life itself. And every unexamined commitment is a quiet decision to give pieces of that life away. When you don't define your goals first, commitments are made reactively. You respond to urgency instead of importance. You agree because someone asked, not because it aligns. Over time, this creates a subtle resentment, not toward others, but toward yourself. You sense that your energy is being drained, yet you can't point to a single dramatic cause. The Stoic solution is deceptively simple. Decide what matters before anyone asks for your time. Practically, this means clarifying a small set of priorities: your work, focus, your health, your rest, your relationships that truly matter. These don't need to be grand ambitions. They need to be honest. Once these are clear, commitments become easier to evaluate. You're no longer asking, "Should I help?" You're asking, "Does this serve what I've chosen to protect?" This shift removes guilt from the equation. Saying no is no longer a rejection of someone else. It is a commitment to something already decided. The Stoics valued this kind of internal consistency. A life aligned with reason creates fewer internal conflicts and fewer external ones. To apply this, begin each week by identifying one or two non-negotiables, time blocks that belong to your priorities, not to requests. When something new appears, measure it against those anchors. If it fits, you accept freely. If it doesn't, you decline calmly, without needing elaborate explanations. The effect is profound. Your calendar becomes a reflection of your values. Your energy stabilizes. You stop feeling pulled in multiple directions at once. Others may notice that you are less available, but more grounded. Less reactive, but more present. Stoicism teaches that freedom is not found in having fewer demands placed on you. It is found in choosing which demands deserve access to your life. When goals come first, commitments fall into order. And when order returns, people-pleasing quietly loses its power, not through resistance, but through clarity. Way number 4, practice Stoic self-talk, internal authority. People-pleasing rarely begins in conversation with others. It begins in conversation with yourself. Long before you say yes out loud, an inner voice has already decided that refusal would be selfish, disappointing, or unsafe. This voice speaks quickly, quietly, and convincingly, and because it feels familiar, you mistake it for truth. Stoicism treats this inner dialogue as the true battlefield, not because words create reality, but because judgments shape behavior. When your self-talk is ruled by fear, your actions will follow no matter how reasonable you try to appear on the outside. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of this daily in Meditations. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. In modern terms, whatever tone you use with yourself becomes the tone of your life. If your inner voice is apologetic, rushed, or guilt-driven, your boundaries will always feel fragile. Stoic self-talk is not positive thinking. It is not affirmation or self-encouragement in the emotional sense. It is internal authority, the calm, reasoned voice that states facts without drama. It sounds grounded, not comforting, clear, not indulgent. Compare these two inner responses to a request you don't want to accept. I should help. It's not that hard. I'll deal with the stress later. Versus, I don't have the capacity for this. That's enough information. The difference is not attitude, it's governance. In the first, emotion leads and reason follows. In the second, reason sets the boundary and emotion is allowed to settle afterward. To practice Stoic self-talk, begin by noticing the automatic narratives that arise before you agree to things. Pay attention to phrases like, they'll be upset. I don't want to seem difficult. It's easier to just do it. Stoicism doesn't argue with these thoughts. It replaces them with more accurate ones. Discomfort is not danger. Another person's feelings are not my responsibility. My energy is finite, and that matters. These statements are not meant to hype you up. They are meant to stabilize you. A practical way to apply this is to create a small set of internal phrases you return to whenever pressure appears. Short, neutral reminders, not explanations, not debates, just anchors. Over time, these phrases become familiar pathways. Your mind naturally follows under stress. The effect is subtle but powerful. Decisions take less effort. You stop needing external validation to feel justified. Even when you do choose to help, it feels clean because it came from choice, not compulsion. Stoicism teaches that true authority is not imposed outwardly, it is established inwardly. When your inner voice becomes steady, your outer responses follow naturally. You don't sound defensive, you don't sound cold, you sound settled, and that is what changes everything. Way. Number 5. Pause before you answer. Picture a familiar situation. Someone asks you for help, maybe a colleague dropping extra work on you at the end of the day, or a family member making a last-minute request. There's a brief silence, just a second. And in that second, you feel the pressure to respond quickly, to be agreeable, to avoid awkwardness. So you answer before you've even checked in with yourself. Sure. And later, when you're tired, resentful, or overwhelmed, you wonder why you didn't slow down. This is not a character flaw, it's a habit. Stoicism teaches that most regret does not come from bad intentions, but from unexamined speed. When you answer immediately, you are not choosing, you are reacting. And reaction is where people-pleasing thrives. Epictetus was clear on this point. He taught that between stimulus and response lies judgment. The request itself has no power. What creates pressure is the assumption that an answer must come now. Stoic discipline begins by challenging that assumption. Pausing before you answer is not avoidance. It is self-respect in motion. A pause gives your reason time to catch up with your reflexes. It allows you to ask quiet questions that rarely get space. Do I actually want to do this? Do I have the energy for it? What will agreeing cost me later? Without that pause, you default to old patterns. With it, you regain choice. Practically, this can look very simple. You don't need elaborate phrases or explanations. A pause can be verbal, "Let me think about that," or "I'll get back to you." Or it can be internal, taking a breath before replying to a message, stepping away for a moment, instead of responding on impulse. The power is not in the words, it's in the delay. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. People pleasers are often trained to equate speed with kindness. But Stoicism reframes kindness as alignment, not immediacy. When you pause, you are not being difficult. You are being deliberate. Over time, the effects compound. Decisions feel cleaner. You stop agreeing to things you later resent. Even when you do say yes, it feels grounded because it came after reflection, not pressure. Others may notice that you respond less quickly, but more clearly. And clarity, more than speed, builds respect. The pause also retrains your nervous system. It teaches your body that nothing catastrophic happens when you don't answer right away. That tension fades. Confidence grows, not from confrontation, but from composure. And once you've created that space, the next step becomes possible, learning how to evaluate what's being asked of you, not emotionally, but rationally. That's where we turn next. Way number 6. Assess the pattern, not the request. A single request can sound reasonable, polite, even thoughtful. That's why people-pleasing so often slips past your awareness, not through obvious exploitation, but through repetition. One favor here, another small ask there. Nothing outrageous on its own. Yet over time, a pattern forms, and you're the only one consistently adjusting. Stoicism teaches you to stop judging moments in isolation. Wisdom comes from seeing what repeats. Seneca warned that we are most deceived, not by what is dramatic, but by what is habitual. When something becomes routine, we stop questioning it. The Stoic response is to zoom out, not "Is this request fair?" but "What does this pattern reveal?" Patterns answer questions. A single request never will. Do they show up for you when you need support? Do they respect your limits once stated? Do they ask, or do they assume? A relationship doesn't reveal itself in emergencies. It reveals itself in defaults. People pleasers often assess requests emotionally. How bad will it feel to say no right now? Stoicism shifts the lens to reason. What has consistently happened when I say yes? This change alone breaks the spell. You realize that pressure doesn't come from the request. It comes from ignoring the evidence of repetition. Practically, assessing the pattern means pausing to review recent history. Ask yourself 3 grounded questions. How often am I asked compared to others? What happens when I hesitate or decline? Is there reciprocity or just expectation? These are not accusations, they are observations. Stoicism does not moralize, it measures. When a pattern shows imbalance, the Stoic response is not confrontation, it is adjustment. You reduce availability, you respond with clarity instead of urgency. You stop filling gaps that were never yours to fill. And crucially, you do this without explaining the pattern to the other person. You don't need agreement for a boundary to be valid. This approach protects your dignity. Calling out patterns invites debate. Changing your participation ends the cycle. The effect is immediate and revealing. Some people adapt because they valued you beyond convenience. Others resist because the pattern benefited them. Either way, you gain information, and with information comes freedom. Stoicism reminds us that character is shown in consistency, so is disrespect. When you assess the pattern instead of the request, you stop being pulled into momentary pressure and start responding from a wider truth. You are not obligated to keep participating in dynamics that drain you, simply because each individual ask sounds reasonable. Reasonable moments can still form unreasonable lives. By choosing to see patterns clearly, you reclaim perspective. And perspective, more than confrontation or explanation, is what quietly restores your power. Way number 7, say less, not more. No excuses. One of the quiet habits that keeps people-pleasing alive is not saying yes, it's explaining why. The moment you feel pressure, your mind rushes to construct a story. You soften the refusal. You justify the limit. You offer context, background, apologies. And without realizing it, you turn a simple decision into something that sounds negotiable. Stoicism sees this clearly. The problem is not the boundary. The problem is the excess language around it. Epictetus taught that if you want to be free, you must give up the need to be approved. Over-explaining is approval-seeking in disguise. It's an attempt to manage how the other person feels about your limit. And the more you explain, the more you invite discussion, persuasion, and pressure. Think about the difference between these two responses. I can't help with that. I have too much going on right now. Versus, I can't help with that. The first sounds reasonable. The second sounds firm. And firmness is often mistaken for coldness, not because it is unkind, but because it refuses to perform emotional labor on demand. Stoicism reminds us that clarity does not require elaboration. A boundary is not an argument. It does not need evidence. It needs consistency. People-pleasers often believe that if they explain enough, the other person will understand, and then everything will feel peaceful. In reality, explanations rarely create peace. They create openings. Each added reason becomes something to challenge, adjust, or work around. What if we do it another day? What if I help you with that? It won't take long. This is how a simple no turns into a slow erosion of your limit. The Stoic approach is to keep responses short, neutral, and complete. No emotional padding, no defensive tone. Just a calm statement of reality. Not because you're hiding something, but because your decision does not require permission. To apply this, practice reducing your responses by half. Notice how often you add unnecessary context. Replace long explanations with simple closures. I'm not available for that. That doesn't work for me. I won't be taking this on. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. Silence after a short refusal can feel heavy. But Stoicism teaches you to tolerate that discomfort without rushing to fill it. Silence is not rudeness. It is restraint. The effect of saying less is immediate. Conversations end sooner. Pressure has nowhere to land. You feel less drained because you're no longer performing justification. And over time, people learn something important, not through what you say, but through what you stop offering. You are not responsible for making your limits emotionally easy to accept. You are responsible for stating them honestly and living by them consistently. Stoicism is not about withdrawing from others. It is about withdrawing from unnecessary self-explanation. When you say less, you protect your energy. And when your energy is protected, your boundaries finally begin to hold quietly, cleanly, and without regret. Way number 8. Remember, relationships require balance. Consider a familiar situation. There's someone in your life who often leans on you for time, advice, emotional support, small favors that quietly add up. You listen, you adjust, you show up. And when you finally need something, space, understanding, help, the response is vague, delayed, or absent. Nothing overtly cruel happens. Just an imbalance you can feel but struggle to name. People pleasers often tolerate this longer than they should because each individual interaction seems harmless. Stoicism asks you to look at the relationship as a whole. The Stoics were clear that healthy relationships are built on reciprocity, not endurance. Seneca wrote extensively about friendship, warning that bonds become corrupt when one side gives endlessly while the other merely receives. To give without return is not virtue, it is self-neglect. This is where people-pleasing hides behind loyalty. You tell yourself you're being patient, understanding, generous. But Stoicism introduces a sharper question. Is this relationship mutual or merely familiar? Balance does not mean equal effort at all times, but it does mean a shared willingness to give and to consider the other. When balance is absent, resentment slowly replaces goodwill, not because you expect repayment, but because your inner sense of fairness is being violated. Stoicism does not shame this feeling, it treats it as information. Resentment is often the mind's signal that a boundary has been crossed repeatedly. The Stoic approach is not to accuse or demand change, it is to adjust participation. You give less where there is less return. You stop over-functioning. You allow silence where you once rushed in to fill gaps. This is not punishment. It is recalibration. To apply this, observe without judgment. Over the next few interactions, notice who initiates, who checks in, who respects your limits. Let patterns speak louder than intentions. Then respond proportionally. Invest where there is reciprocity. Step back where there is expectation without care. The effect is revealing. Balanced relationships stabilize. One-sided ones either adapt or fade. In both cases, clarity replaces confusion. You stop questioning your worth because you're no longer overextending to prove it. Stoicism teaches that harmony in relationships mirrors harmony within. When you respect your own limits, you naturally seek connections that do the same. You don't need to sever ties dramatically. Often, simply withdrawing excess effort restores equilibrium. Remember, you are not meant to be endlessly available to everyone. Relationships are not measured by how much you can tolerate, but by how well both sides can give and receive. And once you recognize this balance, the final step becomes clear: learning to offer help only when it comes from choice, not fear. That's where we turn next. Way number 9. Help only when it aligns with your will. There is a quiet difference between helping because you choose to and helping because you're afraid not to. On the surface, both look the same. You show up, you give time, you offer support, but internally, they feel completely different. One leaves you steady. The other leaves you drained, resentful, or oddly empty afterward. Stoicism draws a clear line here. Virtue is not measured by how much you give. It is measured by whether your action comes from reasoned choice. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that no act is good if it violates the integrity of the soul performing it. In modern terms, help that costs you your inner order is not noble, it is misaligned. True generosity never requires self-betrayal. People pleasers often help from compulsion. They say yes to avoid guilt, tension, or withdrawal of approval. The help may be real, but the motive is fear. Stoicism doesn't condemn kindness, it refines it. It asks one simple question before any act of giving. Do I genuinely will this? When help aligns with your will, it feels clean. You don't keep score. You don't replay the moment later. You don't hope for recognition. You give, and then you move on. When help does not align with your will, it leaves residue, mental fatigue, irritation, a sense of being used. That residue is information. To apply this Stoic principle, pause and check your internal posture before agreeing. Not your thoughts, your body. Is there tension, pressure, a sense of obligation, or is there openness and calm? Stoicism trusted the signals of inner order. A settled yes strengthens you. A forced yes weakens you. This doesn't mean you only help when it's easy. Stoics were not comfort seekers. It means you help when the action is consistent with your values and capacity, not when it's driven by fear of disapproval. You may still choose inconvenience, but it will be a chosen inconvenience, not a coerced one. Practically, this looks like selective generosity. You give deeply where it matters. You decline where it doesn't. You stop scattering your energy in the hope that someone will finally see your effort. Instead, you act from clarity and let outcomes be what they are. The effect is profound. Helping becomes fulfilling again. Resentment fades. Your kindness regains weight because it is no longer automatic. Others feel the difference too. Help given freely carries a steadiness that people instinctively respect. Stoicism teaches that freedom is not the absence of obligation, it is alignment with one's own will. When you help only from that aligned place, you don't become colder, you become truer. And paradoxically, your generosity becomes more powerful, not less. This is where people-pleasing finally loosens its grip. Not because you stopped caring, but because you learned that care, to be virtuous, must first be voluntary. You don't stop being a people-pleaser by becoming harder. You stop by becoming clearer. That is the quiet truth running through every Stoic principle you've just heard. People-pleasing was never about kindness. It was about blurred authority. When your inner order was unclear, others' needs rushed in to fill the space. When your limits were undefined, every request felt personal, urgent, and heavy. Stoicism does not correct this with confrontation. It corrects it with self-governance. The moment you reclaim authorship over your time, energy, and attention, the dynamic shifts without force. You no longer argue with requests, justify your limits, or manage reactions. You respond from alignment. And when alignment becomes consistent, others naturally adjust, not because you demanded respect, but because clarity always reorganizes relationships. Each way you learned works for the same reason. Boundaries become quieter, decisions slow down, patterns become visible, language becomes simpler, giving becomes voluntary again. None of this requires aggression or withdrawal. It requires steadiness. Stoicism has always taught that power does not come from control over others, but from command over oneself. When your inner order is firm, you don't need to push people away. You simply stop moving toward what drains you. That restraint does more than arguments ever could. It restores dignity, calm, and proportion to your life. And remember this as you move forward. You were never meant to carry everyone's comfort at the cost of your own. You were not designed to absorb tension, anticipate needs, and erase yourself just to keep things smooth. Peace does not come from being endlessly agreeable. It comes from being internally consistent, from choosing when to give, when to pause, and when to step back without guilt, without drama. Calm boundaries speak louder than loud refusals. They don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves over time, through consistency, As you reflect on everything you've heard, ask yourself one simple question. Which way will you practice this week to protect your inner order? Let that answer guide your next small decision. If it helps, leave a reminder for yourself in the comments. My time is not negotiable. And if you choose clarity over pleasing, calm over pressure, and inner order over approval, like this video and subscribe. You're not stepping away from others. You're stepping back into yourself, quietly, deliberately, and on the Stoic path.